One may have a blazing hearth in one's soul, and yet no one ever came to sit by it. Passers-by see only wisps of smoke from the chimneys and continue on their way. This is a quote from Vincent van Gogh. Sadly, this is a very fitting quote to his life. My goal here is to tell you and hopefully give you a little insight into the very important and very dramatic life of Vincent van Gogh. He was born on March 30th, 1853. He was the oldest of 6 children, 3 sisters and 2 brothers, and one brother in particular he was very close to named Theo. His father was a Protestant preacher, and that led to his future in the church, actually. He went to boarding school, but he actually had no real education in art as a child, even into his teens. His brother Theo, in his importance to him, he wrote to him about 500 times during his life, consistently. And also, his brother was the one who funded all of his art, pretty much everything he did until after he left the church. And he was Vincent's closest friend. His earliest job was at 16, which is at his uncle's art dealership called Hag. He was sent to London after working there for a year, and he stayed there for 2 years. And then he went to Paris and lost entire interest. His next best thing was, he thought, since his father was a preacher, that he would also become a preacher. He failed at this, though, because he lost interest in that very quickly. Instead, he decided to join a ministry that worked with the very, very poor miners in a place called Borinage. These people influenced his artwork in the future because he liked to paint, and this was something that touched him very dearly and that was important to him. The church removed him from his duties there because they actually felt that he was giving away too much of his possessions and that he was becoming too much of a quote-unquote martyr in this situation. This caused a future split with Vincent and the church, and he became somewhat agnostic after that. After a lot of encouragement from his brother, this is when he actually started art, in the year 1881. This was when he was age 27, so he didn't start till very late in his life. He got instructed by Anton Mauve, who is actually another artist, but his tutoring ended because of a relationship he had with a prostitute named Sien Humik. And she had actually already had a kid, so that was really the main problem there, because he had actually started to deal with prostitutes pretty quickly after he left the church. His first major painting was The Potato Eaters, and this was after he had met an artist by the name of Jean-Francois Millet. And he forced himself very, very hard. He worked very, very hard in order to make his performances and artwork very, very similar to his, because he was so inspired by it. This was his first major painting, and it was made in 1885. A change in color occurred when he went to the Academy of Art called Antwerp, and this was all funded by his brother. Here he became influenced by Peter Paul Rubens and actually some Japanese artists as well, to introduce more color, because he had very much earth tones before, and suddenly he became inspired by the beauty that he saw. One of his major things that he became concerned with later is that he wanted to make a civilization for artists to go, and one of his good friends was named Paul Gauguin, and this is the only person who moved in with him after a lot of encouraging and possibly even a little money exchange between Paul and his brother Theo. This ended sadly because of the effects that his mental illnesses started to take on him. One of the things that he did was, one night when Paul said he was going to leave, he actually took out a knife and followed him out of the house. And when he realized what he had done and that he had scared Paul off, he went and he didn't cut off his entire ear, as a lot of people said. He actually just cut off part of his earlobe and gave it to a prostitute to hold, and then he went back to his bed and fell asleep, and the police came in later and had to put him in the hospital because of the loss of blood. He committed himself to an insane asylum in the year 1888 after a bunch of psychotic attacks and hallucinations. This is actually when he had a lot of his biggest works because he would almost do a painting a day. He was very, very prolific. His most famous painting, Starry Night, was done here. He checked out of the institution in the year 1890, because he was doing a lot better. He hadn't had any hallucinations or anything like that. But sadly, after a few weeks of actually even more vigorous painting, because that's what he did to soothe himself, that and drink absinthe, it was really bad because as he drank absinthe, his hallucinations actually got worse despite what he actually thought. And he attempted to kill himself on July 27th, 1890. He actually survived for 2 days after this and died in his bed. This picture he has actually is of the wheat field where he actually shot himself, because this was a place he liked to visit a lot after he left the asylum. The illnesses he had during his life there's a debate on whether it was bipolar disorder or whether it was manic depressive. But the point is, he often went through fits of extreme anguish and pain, and also had times where he would be in extreme joy. This was also due to the fact that he had a lesion on his brain as a child, and it made all of his things, including temporal lobe epilepsy, much worse. And the fact that he drank absinthe had something in it called thujone, and that's a toxin that increased his lesion and also made it very, very active and caused him to have fits and seizures. He also might have had lead poisoning, and this is because he used lead-based paints, and he would often bite his hands even though they had paint on them. And the reason why thujone and lead poisoning, the two cool things about these is that they made him see circles and kind of odd shapes, and also it brightened the color of yellows and oranges, which is why you see a lot of people think that he may have had all of these circles in paintings and odd shapes and kind of blurs, because that's what he actually saw, as opposed to it just being impressionistic. Some interesting things to know is that during his life he only sold one painting, and that was to a family friend, essentially, even though he made around 900 in his lifetime. He's possibly the most prolific painter of all time. He now has the 4th highest selling painting of all time, which is his portrait of Dr. Gatchett, which is in the background, and it sold for $82.5 million in 1990. Today, that would be the equivalent of $139.5 million. If you actually look at the list further, which I found on Business Insider, he also has the 11th and 15th ranked most expensive things of all time, including his famous painting, Irises. To conclude, I just want to say that this is a man who had a lot of very, very bad pain in his life, and he made this pain into incredible beauty and joy in his life, and that is why he is so important to me. Thank you.
This is Tammy. Tammy was an average 44-year-old woman who was married for 25 years, had 2 daughters, a dog, and a cat. Tammy was a florist who made flower arrangements for weddings, parties, and even Millionaire's Row at the Kentucky Derby. On January 21, 2012, Tammy suffered from a stroke that hit the left side of her brain, leaving her, the doctors thought, paralyzed on the right side of her body. Tammy was rushed to the hospital, where she spent a week in the hospital, and the doctors rushed in and out doing tests and assessments. Tammy was later moved to the Fraser Rehab for 2 months, where she spent working on speech therapy, occupational therapy, and physical therapy. Doctors wanted to make sure she could move the right side of her body, so when she left, she was able to move her leg, but not her arm. Tammy struggled to feed herself, say her name, and even say the number of fingers on your hand. I'm here to tell you today about stroke awareness, what a stroke is, and what the signs and symptoms are. I know most of you have heard of a stroke, but a lot of you are probably not sure what a stroke really is. There are two types of stroke. The first stroke is an ischemic stroke, which is caused by a blood clot in an artery. The second type of stroke is a hemorrhagic stroke, which is a blood vessel that has ruptured and prevents bleeding to your brain. Another type of stroke is a transcendent ischemic attack, which is a mini stroke that is caused by a temporary clot in an artery. According to strokeassociation.org, 795,000 Americans have suffered from a stroke, a recurrent or a new stroke each year. Now that you know what a stroke is, I'm going to tell you what the acronym FAST stands for, that is often used when talking about strokes. FAST stands for face, arms, speech, and time. For face, you should ask the person to smile and see if one side of their face droops. Depending on what side of the brain was hit depends on what side of the face will droop. This can happen on the left or the right side. For arms, you want the person to raise both of their arms to see if one drifts downward. The weak side is the side of the brain that was hit. Like if it hits the right side, then the left side will be weak, and if it hits the left, then the right side will be weak, so it's opposites. For speech, you want to ask the person to repeat a simple phrase to see if their speech is slurred or sounds strange. When we asked my mom, she could not talk. According to, for time, you want to ask the person, or you want to see if any of these things have happened. If it does, then you want to call 911 immediately. According to strokeassociation.org, every 4 minutes someone dies from a stroke. Other symptoms and signs of a stroke are, according to American Heart Association, you should, if you see sudden weakness or numbness in the legs or arms or face. Another is if you're confused or have trouble understanding. You have a headache with no known cause, or you have trouble seeing out of one or both of your eyes. According to strokeawareness.com, stroke education can save lives. Also, universityhospital.org said University of Louisville Hospital downtown was just named the first Joint Commission Certified Comprehensive Stroke Center in Kentucky and the 20th in the nation in February 2012. Since University of Louisville is so close to here, treatment can get started faster to help stroke victims. According to the mayoclinic.org, for an ischemic stroke, doctors must quickly restore the blood to the brain. And they also give aspirin so that way another stroke doesn't happen. A stent might also be put in so the artery doesn't become narrow. And for a hemorrhagic stroke, the doctors control bleeding to the brain. Surgery is also an option to help reduce future risk of a stroke. According to stroke.org, strokes are the fourth leading cause of death and the leading cause of disability in adults in the United States. But don't think that a stroke can't happen to you. Stroke affects people of all ages and can happen to anyone. Remember that there are two types of strokes: the ischemic, which is a blood clot in an artery, and the hemorrhagic, which is a blood vessel rupturing. Using FAST, face, arms, speech, and time can help you detect when a stroke has occurred, along with other symptoms. Remember Tammy, the 44-year-old woman that I talked about in the beginning of my speech? Well, 14 months after her stroke, Tammy now walks with a cane and can say complete sentences. She will probably never work again or drive a car or make another flower arrangement. She gets stronger every day with visits to the doctor and rehab. The ischemic stroke took so much from Tammy's life, and she was lucky but her family is lucky that she is still alive. You see, Tammy is my mom. I became interested in strokes on that January day when my mom suffered from the most common type of stroke. If my family had known so much about strokes as we do now, like FAST and other symptoms, we might have been able to lessen the damage that was caused.